In the autumn of 1944, across the rain-soaked fields of eastern France, something unexpected was happening on the battlefield. German tank commanders, veterans of Poland, France, and the vast plains of Russia, were reporting a new kind of enemy. Not heavier, not more armored, not more powerful, just faster. They described an American vehicle that appeared without warning, fired with deadly precision, and vanished before a return shot could be aligned. Gunners swore they had the target in their sights, and then it was gone. Some believed they were facing armored cars. Others suspected coordinated ambush teams. But again and again, reports mentioned the same machine, the M18 Hellcat. To understand why German Panzers struggled to hit it, we must go back to 1940. When France fell to German blitzkrieg, American military observers studied the disaster closely. German armored divisions had shattered defensive lines, not simply with firepower, but with speed, coordination, and maneuver. Tanks did not crawl forward, they surged. They bypassed strong points, they struck flanks, they refused to fight static battles. The U.S. Army absorbed this lesson carefully. Rather than designing tank destroyers as slow, heavily armored defensive guns, American planners developed a radical idea. Tank destroyers would be hunters. They would not wait behind fixed lines. They would move rapidly to threatened sectors, strike enemy armor at vulnerable angles, and relocate before becoming targets themselves. Speed would be their armor. This philosophy demanded something unusual. Engineers had to abandon the traditional instinct to add more steel. Every additional plate meant more weight. More weight meant less mobility. Less mobility meant vulnerability. The result was controversial even before it reached the battlefield. The Hellcat was light, shockingly light for a fully tracked armored vehicle. Its armor was thin enough that a direct hit from most German tank guns would be catastrophic. Its turret was open at the top, exposing the crew to artillery fragments and the elements. But beneath that light structure was something revolutionary. A powerful radial aircraft engine roared inside its hull, giving it explosive acceleration. Its torsion bar suspension allowed it to move quickly across uneven terrain without losing stability. Its compact design reduced its silhouette. And when placed on open roads, the Hellcat could reach speeds of nearly 55 miles per hour, faster than many wheeled vehicles of its time. It was the fastest fully tracked armored vehicle of the Second World War. Yet raw speed alone does not win battles. What made the Hellcat dangerous was how American crews were trained to think. Tank destroyer doctrine emphasized movement over position. Crews practiced rapid redeployment. They drilled in flanking maneuvers. They learned to fire, reverse instantly, pivot, and relocate before an enemy could adjust aim. Unlike traditional tanks, which were designed to hold ground and absorb punishment, the Hellcat was designed to refuse prolonged engagement. In training fields across the United States, crews rehearsed a simple rhythm: stop, fire, move. Stop, fire, move. The goal was not to trade blows. The goal was to disrupt, confuse, and strike where armor was weakest. When the Hellcat finally arrived in Europe in 1944, the German army was no longer the unstoppable force of 1940, but its armored units were still formidable. The Panther and Tiger tanks carried powerful guns and thick frontal armor. On paper, the Hellcat seemed fragile by comparison. German doctrine assumed that American armor would engage head-on. The Hellcat had no intention of doing so. Its thin armor forced discipline. Crews knew they could not survive a direct duel. They depended on terrain, hedgerows, tree lines, small ridges, anything that could conceal movement. The open turret, often criticized as a weakness, offered unmatched visibility. Commanders could stand upright, scanning the battlefield with the naked eye, rather than relying solely on narrow vision slits. This awareness became a weapon. While German crews searched through optics, Hellcat commanders observed with wide peripheral vision. They spotted dust clouds, engine smoke, shifting silhouettes. They reacted faster. And reaction time on the battlefield is often the difference between survival and destruction. The M18 76mm gun was not the largest weapon of the war, but it was accurate and capable of penetrating the side armor of German tanks at combat ranges. American crews were taught to never waste that advantage. They avoided thick frontal armor. They hunted flanks. Mobility allowed choice. Choice allowed survival. As the summer of 1944 gave way to autumn, the Western Front became a fluid battlefield. German forces counterattacked repeatedly, attempting to slow the Allied advance. In these chaotic engagements, the Hellcat began to reveal its true character. It was not a breakthrough tank. It was not a siege weapon. It was a predator. When German armored columns advanced along narrow roads, Hellcats repositioned along parallel routes. When Panthers formed defensive lines, Hellcats circled through secondary paths to probe weaknesses. When fire was exchanged, the American vehicles did not remain in place to confirm kills. They shifted immediately. This constant movement frustrated German gunners trained to calculate range, adjust elevation, and fire with precision at stable targets. It denied stability. Its engine note, high-pitched and aggressive, became associated with sudden danger. German crews learned that if they saw one, there were likely others nearby, already maneuvering. Even psychologically, the vehicle created uncertainty. Speed suggests confidence. Rapid movement suggests coordination. When an enemy refuses to stay in your sights, doubt begins to grow. And doubt in combat spreads quickly. By late 1944, the Hellcat had earned a reputation among American forces as both daring and unforgiving. Its survivability depended entirely on crew skill. There was little margin for error. But in the hands of disciplined operators, it became one of the most tactically disruptive armored vehicles on the Western Front. It did not dominate by absorbing punishment. It dominated by avoiding it. The idea that speed could replace armor seemed risky on paper. On the battlefield, it was devastating. And as German Panzer crews would soon discover in the fog of Arracourt and the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the hardest target to destroy is not the one with the thickest steel. It is the one that refuses to stand still.
Speed is not an accident. It is designed, calculated, fought for in meetings, argued over in factories, and paid for in compromises. Long before the M18 Hellcat ever outran a German Panther in the fields of France, it existed only as a problem, a challenge issued to American engineers: build a tank destroyer that can move faster than anything else on the battlefield. Not slightly faster, overwhelmingly faster. The early prototypes that would eventually become the Hellcat began as experiments in radical weight reduction. Designers understood one unbreakable law of armored warfare: weight is the enemy of speed. Every millimeter of armor plate added protection, but also slowed acceleration, stressed the engine, and reduced agility. So they made a choice that shocked many traditionalists. They stripped it down. The hull armor was kept thin, far thinner than that of a Sherman tank. In some areas, it was just enough to stop small arms fire and shell fragments. Against a direct hit from a high-velocity German gun, it offered little protection. Critics called it reckless, but engineers had something else in mind. Inside the rear of the vehicle, they installed a Continental R975 radio engine, the same type of engine used in aircraft. It produced roughly 400 horsepower,
In a machine weighing only about 17 tons, that power-to-weight ratio was extraordinary for its time. When the driver pressed the throttle, the response was immediate. The Hellcat did not lumber forward, it leapt. Acceleration on open ground was unlike anything most armored crews had experienced. Where heavier tanks built speed slowly, the Hellcat surged. That burst of motion could mean the difference between being targeted and being gone. But raw engine power was only part of the equation. The torsion bar suspension system underneath the hull allowed each road wheel to move independently. This gave the vehicle stability at higher speeds across uneven terrain. Instead of violently bouncing and losing accuracy, the Hellcat could maintain control while maneuvering quickly over rough fields and broken roads. Drivers trained intensely to master this responsiveness. Steering a Hellcat was not like steering heavier armor. It required anticipation and nerve. At high speeds, even small inputs could shift the vehicle dramatically, but in skilled hands, it became a scalpel. Another bold design decision was the open turret. On paper, it looked like a vulnerability, and in many ways it was. Artillery fragments, mortar rounds, even grenades posed serious danger. Rain and snow fell directly onto the crew. There was no overhead protection. Yet the open turret provided something invaluable: visibility. In armored warfare, what you see first, you can shoot first. German tanks, including the Panther and Tiger, relied heavily on precision optics. Their guns were superb at long-range engagements, but their crews operated within enclosed steel compartments, observing the battlefield through limited viewing ports. Hellcat commanders stood upright in the turret when possible, scanning freely with binoculars. They could turn their heads instantly rather than rotating periscopes. Peripheral vision, a simple human advantage, became a tactical edge. Communication also improved. Without a turret roof, crew members could speak more easily, hear external cues, and coordinate movement quickly. Engines approaching, tracks grinding over stone, the subtle sounds of a battlefield were not muffled by steel. The Hellcat's main weapon, the 76mm M1 gun, was mounted in that open turret. It was not as large as the German 88mm, but it fired high-velocity, armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating side armor on most German tanks at effective combat distances. Crucially, the turret traverse was fast. When seconds determined survival, a rapid turret swing meant the gun could track moving targets more efficiently. Combined with the vehicle's mobility, this allowed Hellcats to reposition and re-engage from new angles with startling speed. Every design element reinforced the same principle: avoid being hit. The Hellcat was never meant to endure heavy punishment. It was built to make punishment miss. And in the rolling, fog-covered fields of France, that design would soon be tested against some of the most formidable armored vehicles of the war.
The Allied advance across France had been swift, almost breathtaking. Paris was liberated. German forces were retreating toward their borders. But retreat did not mean surrender. Near the town of Arracourt in northeastern France, German commanders prepared a counterstroke. Fresh Panther tanks, powerful, heavily armored, and armed with long-barreled 75mm guns, rolled toward the front. On paper, the Panther was superior to most American armor. Its frontal armor was thick and sloped. Its gun was accurate and deadly at long range. In a direct duel, the Panther was built to dominate. But battlefields are not decided on paper. The morning of September 19th began under heavy fog. Visibility dropped to mere hundreds of meters. The landscape, rolling fields, scattered hedgerows, small ridge lines, became a maze of shifting shapes and muffled engine noise. For German tank crews advancing through the mist, it was disorienting. For the Americans, it was opportunity. Units equipped with M18 Hellcats moved quietly into concealed positions. Instead of forming rigid defensive lines, they dispersed. Some tucked themselves behind hedgerows, others waited behind gentle rises in the terrain, engines idling low. They did not need to charge, they only needed patience. Through thinning patches of fog, silhouettes began to emerge. Panthers, advancing cautiously but confidently. Their commanders expected to engage Shermans, heavier targets, slower targets. Instead, they met something unpredictable. The first Hellcat fired from the flank. The 76mm gun cracked sharply through the morning haze. Armor-piercing rounds struck the side of a Panther, where protection was thinner. The impact was violent, steel torn, sparks and smoke erupting. Before German gunners could fully identify the source, the Hellcat reversed. Its engine roared, tracks bit into wet soil. Within seconds, it disappeared behind cover. German crews attempted to traverse their turrets toward the muzzle flash, but the fog distorted direction. By the time optics aligned, the target was gone. Moments later, another shot came, from a different angle. The engagement dissolved into confusion. Panthers, designed for long-range dominance, suddenly found themselves reacting instead of dictating. Hellcats did not remain stationary long enough to be ranged properly. They fired, shifted position, reappeared elsewhere. Some advanced aggressively along tree lines to secure better flanking shots. German after-action reports described frustration. Crews noted American vehicles that changed position constantly. Range estimation became unreliable. Target tracking became guesswork. And in armored warfare, hesitation is fatal. Throughout the Arracourt engagements, Hellcat crews exploited side armor whenever possible. They avoided frontal confrontations. They used terrain masking, cresting ridges only long enough to fire before dropping back down. The fog amplified their advantage. Limited visibility reduced the Panthers' long-range superiority. It compressed the battlefield into chaotic close-range encounters where reaction speed mattered more than armor thickness. In several engagements, German tanks were destroyed before they could bring their guns to bear effectively. The Hellcat had done exactly what it was designed to do. It refused to fight on German terms. Arracourt became one of the clearest demonstrations that speed, positioning, and initiative could offset heavier armor. The Panthers were formidable machines, but they were forced into a reactive posture. The battlefield belonged to whoever controlled movement, and at Arracourt, that was the Hellcat.
Winter descended across Belgium and Luxembourg with bitter cold. Snow blanketed forests, ice gripped narrow roads, and under cover of darkness, German forces launched one last massive offensive, the Ardennes Offensive. The objective was bold: split Allied lines, seize key crossings, and force a negotiated peace. German armored columns surged through the dense forests. Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer IVs pushed forward, exploiting weak points. American units were caught off guard in several sectors. Speed now became more than a tactical advantage. It became survival. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M18 Hellcats were ordered to move immediately. Units raced from reserve positions toward threatened sectors. Engines screamed across icy roads. Columns of Hellcats covered distances in hours that would have taken heavier vehicles far longer. They were not just weapons. They were firefighters rushing toward spreading flames. Near Bastogne, the situation grew critical. German forces encircled the town. Supplies dwindled. Pressure mounted. Hellcats were deployed to plug gaps and strike exposed spearheads. Instead of forming static defensive walls, they conducted aggressive counterattacks. When German armor advanced down narrow forest roads, Hellcats maneuvered through secondary paths and clearings, emerging suddenly at flanks. A Panther might push confidently forward, only to be struck from the side by a fast-moving silhouette darting between trees. Then silence. Then absence. The Hellcat's acceleration proved decisive in the Ardennes terrain. Short bursts between tree cover, rapid retreats behind snow-covered ridges, constant relocation to avoid artillery and return fire. German optics were powerful, but forests limited visibility. Turret traverse speed, though respectable, struggled to match targets that appeared briefly and then vanished behind timber and smoke. Even psychologically, the effect was destabilizing. German crews expected fixed defensive lines. Instead, they encountered moving threats, vehicles that struck unexpectedly and refused prolonged engagement. In freezing temperatures, mechanical reliability also mattered. The Hellcat's lighter weight reduced strain on frozen roads and bridges. It could cross routes that heavier Tigers risked damaging. Again and again, mobility frustrated momentum. The Ardennes offensive ultimately failed. German forces were pushed back, exhausted and depleted. In the chaotic winter battles, the Hellcat had played its role, not by absorbing punishment, but by disrupting advances at critical moments. Speed had once again proven stronger than steel.
By early 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end. German armored forces were diminished, short on fuel, short on replacements, short on hope. Yet even in these final months, encounters between Panzers and Hellcats reinforced the same lesson. The hardest target to destroy is the one that refuses to stand still. The M18 Hellcat had never been the thickest armored vehicle. It had never been the most heavily armed. Its protection was thin. Its open turret exposed its crew to danger. But it possessed something many heavier machines lacked: choice. It could choose when to engage. It could choose where to appear. It could choose when to vanish. American crews embraced the doctrine drilled into them years earlier: stop, fire, move. Stop, fire, move. Radio coordination amplified effectiveness. Multiple Hellcats could converge on a single target from different angles, overwhelming turret response times. A German gunner might align on one threat only to be struck from another direction seconds later. There were losses. Thin armor offered no forgiveness for mistakes. Mines, ambushes, artillery. The battlefield was always lethal. But statistics told a compelling story. Hellcat-equipped units achieved favorable kill ratios against German armor in numerous engagements. Survivability was not measured in thickness of steel, but in successful avoidance of hits. In many ways, the Hellcat represented a shift in armored warfare philosophy. It demonstrated that mobility, flexibility, and initiative could counterbalance heavier armor and larger guns. It proved that design trade-offs, when aligned with doctrine, could redefine battlefield dynamics. By the end of the war, over 2,500 Hellcats had been produced. They had served across France, Belgium, and Germany. Crews who survived remembered the vehicle not as invincible, but as alive, responsive, aggressive, unforgiving. German Panzer veterans later described engagements with fast American tank destroyers that seemed to come from nowhere. Some initially mistook them for armored cars because of their speed. That miscalculation could be fatal. History often celebrates the biggest weapons, the thickest armor, the largest guns. But the Hellcat carved its legacy differently. It did not win by enduring impact. It won by denying it. And in the mist of Arracourt, in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, and across the collapsing Western Front, the M18 Hellcat proved a simple, brutal truth of mechanized war.
Steel may stop a shell, but speed makes it miss.